Good evening, and welcome to Cross-Examination. Tonight we delve into one of the most contentious and ethically complex questions of our time. Should governments have a role in managing population growth? The very question itself places two of our most cherished values in direct opposition: the profound responsibility for the long-term sustainability of our planetary home, and the fundamental, inviolable rights of the individual. To navigate this challenging terrain, we are joined by two of the foremost thinkers in their respective fields. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a distinguished environmental scientist and demographer, who will argue that some form of population management is a necessary component of global stewardship, and Dr. Isabella Rossi, a prominent human rights lawyer and sociologist, who contends that any such government intervention is a dangerous ethical overreach. We anticipate a robust and insightful discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. The fundamental premise of my argument is not ideological, but starkly scientific. We inhabit a finite planet with a demonstrably limited carrying capacity. For too long, we have allowed a narrative of infinite growth to dominate our economic and social models, a narrative that is now colliding with ecological reality. Unchecked population growth acts as a direct multiplier of every anthropogenic pressure we face. It intensifies the resource depletion that fuels conflict, from dwindling water reserves to the loss of arable land. It exacerbates the climate crisis, as every additional person, quite rightly, aspires to a life of dignity, which in our current paradigm increases our collective ecological footprint. We are already transgressing several of the planet's critical boundaries, and to ignore the demographic component of this equation is, I believe, a grave dereliction of our duty to future generations. However, let me be unequivocally clear. When I speak of government control, I am not advocating for the coercive top-down mandates that have rightly been condemned. Instead, I propose a framework of non-coercive, supportive government-led initiatives built on three pillars. First, a global push for universal education, particularly for girls and women, as the correlation between educational attainment and lower fertility rates is one of the most powerful and consistent findings in all of social science. Second, ensuring universal and unrestricted access to modern contraception and comprehensive reproductive health care. This is a health and human right in itself, and it empowers individuals to make their own informed choices. And third, the implementation of carefully designed ethical incentivization programs. These would offer positive reinforcements, such as educational grants or tax benefits, for smaller families, framing the choice not as a restriction, but as an act of responsible stewardship. This is not about infringing upon rights. It is about creating the necessary conditions to secure a livable, prosperous, and sustainable future for all of humanity.
Thank you. Dr. Tanaka presents a seemingly pragmatic case, but it is one built upon a foundation that I find ethically perilous. My argument begins and ends with a foundational principle of modern civilization: that bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom are absolute, non-negotiable human rights. The decision of whether, when, and with whom to have a child is perhaps the most profoundly personal choice a human being can make. It must, therefore, remain entirely beyond the reach of state legislation, persuasion, or control. History provides a chilling testament to the dangers of granting governments this power. The moment we legitimize the idea that the state has an interest in private reproductive choices, we walk down a very slippery slope. We need only look to the dark legacy of the eugenics movement or the more recent histories of forced sterilizations and brutal one-child policies, programs that have invariably and disproportionately targeted the most vulnerable among us, marginalized communities, ethnic minorities, and the impoverished. But beyond this fundamental violation of rights, the entire premise that population is the primary driver of our ecological crisis is a dangerous misdiagnosis. The problem is not one of sheer numbers, it is one of grotesque overconsumption and inequitable resource distribution. A small fraction of the world's population residing in the most developed nations, is responsible for the vast majority of historical emissions and current resource depletion. To focus on the birth rates in the Global South is a convenient deflection of responsibility. It allows the hyper-consumerist lifestyles of the wealthy to continue unchallenged, while placing the burden of solving the crisis onto the bodies of the poor. The quote, ethical incentives Dr. Tanaka proposes are, in practice, a form of economic coercion. For a family struggling with poverty, a financial reward is not a gentle nudge. It is a powerful pressure that can compel them to forsake their own desires and cultural values. The solution is not to control human beings, but to pursue justice, demand equity, and radically transform our unsustainable economic models.
Thank you both for those powerful opening statements. Dr. Rossi, you compellingly argue that the core issue is overconsumption, not overpopulation. Dr. Tanaka, how do you respond to the charge that focusing on population numbers in developing nations is a deflection of responsibility from the hyper-consumerist lifestyles of the developed world?
It's a crucial point, and I want to be clear that I do not for a moment absolve the developed world of its disproportionate responsibility. Dr. Rossi is entirely correct that patterns of consumption in the global north are unsustainable and must be radically addressed. However, to frame this as an, quote, or proposition is a false dichotomy. The issues of consumption and population are inextricably linked. It is a, quote, both/and problem. While we must urgently work to reduce our per capita ecological footprint, it is a mathematical and ecological certainty that adding another 2 or 3 billion people to the planet will make a sustainable future virtually impossible to achieve. Those new populations will, and absolutely should, aspire to higher standards of living, which, in our current system, means higher consumption. We cannot, in good conscience, tell one part of the world to curtail its development while another continues its profligate consumption. But we also cannot ignore the compounding effect that population size has on the total environmental impact. True global stewardship requires us to address both variables simultaneously.
But Dr. Tanaka, the very nature of your proposed solutions betrays the inherent bias in this thinking. You speak of universal education and access to family planning, which are laudable goals we both share, but are fundamentally about empowerment, not population control. However, when you introduce incentive programs, where do we imagine these will be implemented? Not in Europe or North America, where birth rates are already low, but in the nations of Africa and South Asia. This proves my point. The policy becomes a tool of control aimed squarely at the Global South, perpetuating a colonial dynamic where developed nations, having built their wealth through unsustainable means, now seek to manage the demographics of poorer nations as the solution. It is a policy that says, we will continue to consume, but you must stop multiplying.
Let's pick up on that thread. Dr. Tanaka, you advocate for a system of, quote, ethical incentives. Dr. Rossi, you've called this a, quote, slippery slope to coercion. Can such a system ever truly be implemented without becoming coercive and discriminatory, as Dr. Rossi fears?
If I may elaborate on that point, Dr. Reed. The danger lies in the state itself becoming an arbiter of the quote, family size. The moment a government program offers a benefit for having, say, 2 children, it implicitly creates a social stigma and a financial penalty for having 3 or more. It turns a deeply personal, often culturally or religiously informed decision into a matter of public judgment and state-sanctioned approval or disapproval. For the affluent, such an incentive might be trivial, but for the poor, as I mentioned, it becomes a powerful instrument of coercion that forces a trade-off between economic well-being and reproductive autonomy. It creates a 2-tiered system where the wealthy can afford to have the families they desire, while the poor are financially incentivized to conform to the state's demographic goals. This is not ethical. It is discriminatory.
I acknowledge the risks, and they are significant. An ethical framework with robust international oversight would be an absolute prerequisite to prevent the abuses Dr. Rossi rightly fears. However, I believe it is possible to design these programs as purely positive reinforcement, not punitive measures. Consider this. Governments constantly use financial incentives to encourage socially beneficial behaviors. We offer tax credits for installing solar panels, for purchasing electric vehicles, or for pursuing higher education. Is it so different to offer an enhanced educational grant or a pension supplement to families who choose to have fewer children? In recognition of the collective good that this choice represents for environmental sustainability, it is not about penalizing those who make different choices, but about rewarding a choice that helps secure our shared future. We must not let the fear of potential misuse paralyze us from using every ethical tool at our disposal to navigate the immense challenge ahead. To conclude, I must reiterate that deliberately ignoring the demographic dimension of our global sustainability crisis is an act of profound short-sightedness. We are navigating an unprecedented challenge that requires a holistic response. Prudent, humane, and forward-thinking governance demands that we use all available ethical tools, most critically, the empowerment of women through education and voluntary family planning, to align our human numbers with the finite capacity of our planet. It is not an act of control, but the ultimate act of responsibility.
My conclusion is this. The path to a just and sustainable future does not lie in the perilous and historically fraught territory of population control. It lies in vigorously championing human rights, demanding social and economic justice for the world's most vulnerable, and radically transforming our inequitable patterns of consumption. The solution is, and has always been, to empower people, especially women, with education, opportunity, and absolute autonomy over their own bodies. The answer is not control. It is freedom.
And on that note, we must end our discussion. My sincere thanks to both Dr. Kenji Tanaka and Dr. Isabella Rossi for their incredibly insightful and impassioned arguments. They have left us with the central, unresolved tension of our age, the difficult, perhaps impossible, balance between our collective ecological responsibility and our inviolable individual freedoms. I'm Evelyn Reed. Good evening.